I've worked with incredible artists and producers from all over the world, and along the way, I've picked up some tricks that the pros usually keep to themselves.
I think I was lying, basically saying,
And after producing music for my clients that's made it to the radio and teaching over 600 students how to do the same thing, I know that these secrets are really the things that can transform your tracks if used properly. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use them and use them properly. So part one is blending in MIDI instruments. Honestly, MIDI instruments are fantastic. I love bass libraries, drum libraries, and things like that because the strings are always sounding new because they are. They're always consistent, and I can just take a MIDI instrument and have it sound super realistic if I know what I'm doing. Now, a lot of bands do want to play the stuff themselves, and I totally understand that. But sometimes the way the bass is being played is a bit inconsistent. So one thing that I like to do specifically for bass is I like to roll the low end up a little bit on the real bass track. And then I'll take the MIDI instrument and I'll roll the high end off. So that way I have a really consistent low end, but yet the high end still sounds and feels superhuman and is still being tracked by the same person. This gives me that consistent low end that I'm looking for while still allowing the artist to do what they do best. And I'll do this with a lot of things. I'll even sample augment or just straight up sample replace drums like kick drums, snares, and toms using plugins like Trigger 2. This is super helpful for me to be able to make sure that things sound good at the source because professional producers know that things just can't always get fixed in the mix. Things have to sound good at the source, and that is why we are so adamant about making sure we get things sounding perfect at the source before we move on. Now, perfection is an illusion, but you get the point. Which actually leads me into trick number 2, which is just retracking things entirely. Sometimes when the band leaves, we just grab our instruments and retrack things ourselves. Now, if you've ever worked with me and you're wondering if I've done that, if I did that, I told you just after I did it. I say, what do you like better, mix 1 or mix 2? And then when you inevitably say you like mix 2 better, I explain why. And sometimes I'll just have you come back into the studio and retrack things. A while back, I was working with an artist whose guitar was out of tune. It was in tune, but the intonation was off. So when they were playing higher up on the neck, things were starting to sound a bit off. So I retracked everything with my guitar and they loved it way better. So then I explained why that was. They came back to the studio and retracked it on my instrument. And while they were there, I intonated their instrument as well. So that way they didn't have to worry about it ever again, or at least until they changed string gauges. Now, I tell my clients when I do this, but a lot of producers will do this and not say a word. If you're a producer, I don't necessarily recommend doing that. I always like being open and honest with my clients, but it's something to keep in mind. Now, trick number 3 is using reference tracks. Almost every professional producer I know will A/B reference the mix that they're working on against something else that's already out. And they will often not tell their clients that that's what they're doing. We're usually looking for things like overall balance, how loud things are. So that way we kind of have an idea of where to go. I like to imagine that there's a car in New York and I ask you to drive from New York to California. There's 1,000 different roads you can take to get from New York to California, but you know a direction to go. Now, if I tell you that I know where I want you to go, but I'm not going to tell you where to go, you still get in the car and drive, you might not ever make it where I want you to go. So having a destination in mind, you can take thousands of pathways to get there, but having at least a destination or a goal in mind is super helpful. So reference tracks are super powerful. I personally don't like to call them reference tracks. I like to call them inspiration tracks. And the reason is we're taking inspiration from these songs, not necessarily referencing them directly. I had a friend who is a fantastic producer. He's honestly unbelievably good. And I was listening to a song and it sounded just like his song. And so I checked the credits and he wasn't the producer of that song. So I reached out to him and I was like, dude, like this sounded just like you. I had to check the credits. And he laughed so hard. He's like, actually, funny enough, the person that produced that song straight up said they ripped from his song, but he wasn't even mad because he ripped that from another producer in the same genre. And so this is stuff that we do all the time. We pull inspiration from lots of different places. There's this quote from Michael Bublé that I just absolutely love.
If you steal from one, you're a thief. But if you steal from everyone, you can call it research. I always thought, yes, I steal from everyone, yeah.
The best art is taking things from all over, combining it, and making it your own. And so having a couple different reference tracks that you can use is really helpful at having a goal so that way you know where to go. Just don't straight up plagiarize it. Now, trick number 4 is something that I was a little bit hesitant to add to this list. In fact, I deleted it and then added it back in because, well, I like to tell you guys the truth here. On occasion, we will make intentional mistakes. You're probably thinking, why in the world would you make intentional mistakes? Let me explain it to you. I actually talked with 4 other different producers and they all do the same thing. So I'm not the only one. On occasion, clients, and specifically bands in my case, are looking for problems when you send them a mix. Sometimes you're on mix revision 4, 5, or 6, and all of the band members are arguing about what needs to be changed. The drummer wants the drums louder, the guitarist wants the guitars louder and the drums quieter, the vocalist wants the vocals louder. Of course, everybody's going to have different opinions. So sometimes what we'll do is sprinkle in some intentional mistakes so that way everybody can all agree and then move forward. Sometimes I will intentionally leave the vocals just too quiet and then send mix 1 and 2. What do you guys like better? What do you think needs to be fixed? And then they will all collectively agree that the vocals need to get better. I don't do this all the time, but it is a helpful tool to get everybody to collectively agree and continue to move on with the song. On the book, On Writing, a Memoir of the Craft, Stephen King talks about how he uses different people's point of views and feedback to improve his writing. He also mentions that if you are getting multiple different pieces of advice, that's usually a good thing. But if everybody is aligned up and saying that one thing is specifically needs to get fixed, then that's a problem. This is important when you're getting feedback on your music too. If you send it to everybody, one person might say the vocals are too bright, someone might say they're too dark, someone might say they wish it was louder, someone might say they wish it was quieter. That's good news. You shouldn't go out and fix all of those things. But if everybody says the vocals are too quiet, you might want to go fix that. So sometimes being able to sprinkle those things in so I can get a band to agree and move forward with their music and inevitably get their music out there and heard the way they want it to be heard is the end goal. I know this one is going to stir up some stuff in the comments, so I'm really excited to see what you guys have to think about this one. Now, trick number 5 is gaslighting artists. I know I said at the beginning of this video that I like to be open and honest with my clients, but really what I like to do is get a result that they're happy with and that they're thrilled with. So sometimes we have to gaslight artists to get what they inevitably want. Kurt Cobain hated double tracking. If you're not aware what double tracking is, it's where we do the same take but over again. We record it over again, put maybe one in the left, one in the right, and things just start to sound really full. Kurt Cobain hated this and he wanted things to sound raw, whatever that means. And believe me, I've talked with a lot of artists and they all have a different definition of what raw means. So Butch Vig essentially gaslighted Kurt Cobain to get him to double track his guitars.
Still didn't sound big enough for me. So we kept overdubbing guitars. We added 2 more bassmans and the final super grunge bassman with a pedal. I don't know how I got Kurt to do all those guitars. I think I kept saying, I think I was lying, basically saying, there's a problem with the track, it didn't record properly, or it's out of tune or something, so let's just do it again. So he thought he was doing the same part over. Meanwhile, I just kept putting him to new tracks, so we ended up with the clean track and 5 guitar tracks. So now it's finally sounding like a rock song.
Now for me, I actually do the opposite. A lot of times the artist won't necessarily get a good take. So what I'll say is I want doubles and I just want to get as many doubles or quad tracks as I possibly can. And so I'll have them re-record it so that way I can add it as a double. When in all reality, the first take might not have been the greatest, but I don't want to tell them that it sucked because I don't want to bring the overall energy of the room down. I've done this before. I used to be hard and start pushing against the artist and try to draw as much as I could out. But what would happen was they would just start to crumble up and not believe in themselves. And I know that they're great. I know they're good at what they do, and I know that I could draw it out of them. So what I do is I essentially positively gaslight them, tell them that they're absolutely amazing. And if you've ever worked with me in the studio, I promise you are the coolest person ever in the whole wide world. I will make you feel that way, and I will get the best takes from you because that is my job as a producer. So it's not really what Butch Vig did, but it's still essentially gaslighting artists to get what they want, essentially. Now, trick number 6 is stupid simple plugins that make us 100 times faster. Every producer has a handful of plugins that keep in their back pocket that just always work no matter what. One of mine is Infected Mushroom Pusher. If I throw that on the master bus, I'm going to have something that sounds really good and almost like it's already mastered out of the gate. Every time I throw it on the master bus, all my clients are usually thrilled with the way things are sounding already. It makes me look like a magician when in all reality, I just threw one plugin on and turned up a couple knobs. Now, this doesn't replace our knowledge, but it does keep us from having to open up 7 different plugins and adjust 40 different knobs. We can add one plugin, crank one knob, and we're off to the races. Producers are always looking for the next trick that they can put in their back pocket like that, and that's why I am sharing my entire session breakdown and all the stems for free. I'll leave that down in the description below, or you can just scan this QR code here. In that session breakdown, I break down one of my songs, exactly how I produced it from start to finish. I show you the plugins, the settings, the whole 9 yards inside of that, and you even get the stems. I think you're going to love it, and it's all free. Now, trick number 7 is we use presets and templates all the time. A lot of beginner producers are really worried about using templates because they're like, I don't want everything to sound the same. But as producers grow and become more experienced, they understand that their sound is really important. They also understand that time is money, especially when you do this professionally. And if I can do something way faster, it's going to be way better for everybody. A lot of these presets and templates have been fine-tuned over years and years and years of experience. And so if we can just take all of that, load it up in a template, we're ready to go. It makes us look like magicians and everything just sounds good when you throw it in our lap. And we kind of like that sometimes. Now, trick 8 is analog gear in photos is mostly just a marketing gimmick. I know this because I used to do this. Analog gear really is kind of a pain in the butt to use, especially if you are getting stems and having to route things out through patch bays and then have to recall mixes for revisions later on. It's just a pain. Unless you're tracking through the analog gear on the way in, most of the time the benefits do not outweigh the cost. And so what we'll do is sometimes we'll stand in front of all this expensive gear, snap a photo, and then when you send us your music, we mix everything in the box. This is becoming less and less common as most people just don't care about the gear anymore and they care way more about the sound. So if you are somebody who wants to start doing this professionally, I promise you your portfolio matters way more than the photos you take online. And if somebody was to hire you just because of the gear that you have, that's probably a red flag to begin with anyway. At the end of the day, what matters most is how good of a product that you can deliver for your clients. And whether it's you mixing in the box or mixing with outboard gear, it doesn't matter. But if you can get a great sounding song, get it to them faster. And when it comes to sound out of the speakers, not really making a difference whether it's analog or digital, then most of the time digital just ends up being the way to go. I'm not saying analog sounds bad. I use analog modeled plugins all the time. I just don't feel the need to have a bunch of expensive analog gear that's in my room that I have to recall mixes through and take screenshots. I mean, I used to have to pull out my phone and take photos of where the settings were and then have to write it down. And then I couldn't remember if mix 1 had this setting or mix 2 had this setting because I didn't clearly identify that in the photo. And it was always a big pain in the butt. I used to cut out little holes on paper that I used to slide over the knobs as well and have little lines on it. It was such a pain in the butt. And now, with everything being in the box, it's just so much easier. I love the way analog sounds. I don't like having to deal with it. And anymore, I don't feel like posing in front of analog gear because I believe that my work speaks for itself. Another professional producer that really knows what they're doing is Jacob Collier. He's an absolute genius and master musician, and he's been called the Mozart of Gen Z for a good reason. And in this video here, I broke down something I like to call the Jacob Collier rule. In that video, I break down what the Jacob Collier rule is and how you can use it in your next song to keep your listeners hooked and engaged for longer. I'll see you over there. Now, as always, go create.